I once signed a document that would have killed my own son. My hand held the pen. The paper sat there, crispy and white, waiting for my signature. My father stood behind me, his shadow falling across the desk like a dark stain. My uncles watched from the corners of the room, their faces carved from the same hard stone as the marble floor beneath us. And somewhere 3 floors below, locked in a chamber I used to play in as a child, my 17-year-old boy sat waiting to find out if his own father would sign his death warrant. That moment still wakes me at 3 in the morning. I can still feel the weight of that pen between my fingers, smooth and cold against my skin. I can still smell the sandalwood incense burning in the brass holder on my father's desk, mixing with the sharp scent of fresh ink. I can still hear my father's slow, deliberate breathing behind me, patient as a predator waiting for its prey to surrender. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The name I use now isn't the one I was born with. I cannot tell you my real name because there are still people who would kill me if they knew where I was. Men with money and connections and long memories. Men who believe that killing me would be an act of religious duty. What I can tell you is this: I was once a Saudi prince. I lived in palaces that cost more than most villages. I had servants who served my servants. I had power that could destroy lives with a single phone call, and I gave it all up. Every coin, every title, every connection, every friend I ever had. I walked away from billions to save my son's life. This isn't a story about rebellion or politics. It's not about East versus West, or Islam versus Christianity, or any of the simple narratives people like to tell. This is a rescue story. It's about the love between a father and his son, a love tested in fire and found to be stronger than gold. It's about a different kind of love that found us both when we were drowning in our golden prison. It's about a man named Jesus who reached into the darkest corner of our world and pulled us out. Like you, I've laid awake wondering if I made the right choice. Like you, I've stared at the ceiling in the quiet hours of the night, running through every decision, every moment, every fork in the road. Like you, I've questioned everything I was taught to believe. And like you, I've discovered that the truth has a way of finding you, even when you're hiding from it in a palace of gold. Before I tell you about that document, I need to tell you about the cage. It was made of gold and marble, but it was still a cage. I was born in Riyadh in 1968, during a time when oil was transforming our kingdom from a desert nation into one of the richest places on earth. The Arabian Peninsula had been poor for centuries, a land of Bedouin tribes and small trading posts. Then the Western companies came, drilled into the sand, and struck black gold. Within a single generation, everything changed. Suddenly, we were building cities in the desert, importing luxury cars by the shipload, constructing palaces that would have made the kings of Europe jealous. My family had been close to the royal house for generations. We weren't the main branch of the Al Saud dynasty, but we were powerful enough that my father sat in rooms where the future of nations was decided. He advised princes. He brokered deals worth billions. He knew secrets that could topple governments. Our family compound sprawled across several acres of prime land in the capital. There were 7 buildings connected by covered walkways lined with fountains that never stopped flowing, even in the worst summer heat. The main house had 42 rooms. I know because I counted them once as a child, wandering the halls when I couldn't sleep, touching my fingers to each door frame as I passed. My earliest memory is of marble, cool white marble under my bare feet as I padded down the hallway toward my mother's room in the gray light before dawn. The floor was so polished I could see my reflection in it, this small boy with dark hair staring up at himself, wondering who he was. Chandeliers hung above me like frozen waterfalls of crystal, thousands of tiny glass pieces catching the first rays of sunlight and throwing rainbows across the walls. The walls themselves were decorated with gold leaf patterns, geometric designs that wound their way up toward the ceiling like vines made of precious metal. Everything smelled of rose water and expensive oud, that dark woody perfume that wealthy Saudis have used for centuries, the kind that costs more per ounce than gold. But the beauty felt hollow to me even then. My mother would brush my hair in the mornings, her fingers gentle against my scalp, and she would tell me I was blessed. She said Allah had smiled upon our family, that I should be grateful for what we had, that most children in the world would give anything to trade places with me. I tried to feel grateful. I said the words. I nodded and smiled when I was supposed to, but deep inside there was an emptiness I couldn't name. It was like standing in a beautiful room with no windows. Everything looked perfect, but I couldn't breathe. My father was a large man with a thick black beard that he groomed every morning with oil that smelled of amber. His eyes could freeze you in place from across a room. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was the smile of a man who had won something, not the smile of joy. When he walked into a room, everyone stood up. When he spoke, everyone listened. He commanded respect through his presence alone, filling doorways with his broad shoulders, making servants scurry out of his path. I spent my entire childhood trying to earn his approval. He was a deeply religious man, a student of Islamic law who had memorized the Quran by age 15. He prayed 5 times a day without fail, even when he was traveling, even when he was sick. His greatest dream was for me to follow in his footsteps, to become a religious scholar, a guardian of tradition, a leader who would carry our family's name into the next generation. So, my education began early. By age 4, I was sitting with tutors in a room lined with bookshelves, learning to recite verses from the Quran in perfect classical Arabic. The tutors were strict men who believed that the rod and the ruler were the best tools for teaching. When I made mistakes, they rapped my knuckles until they turned red. By 6, I could read texts that most adults struggled with. By 12, I had memorized the entire holy book, all 6,236 verses, every word exactly as it had been written 14 centuries ago. The day I completed this task, my father held a celebration that I still remember in sharp detail. 300 guests came to our compound, men in pristine white thobes and women hidden behind walls, their laughter floating to us like music from another world. 20 sheep were slaughtered for the feast, their blood draining into channels carved specifically for this purpose. Mountains of rice appeared on silver platters. Servants circled with cups of sweet tea and bitter coffee. Incense burned in every corner, filling the air with clouds of fragrant smoke. My father placed his hand on my head, his palm heavy and warm, and called me his blessed son. He called me the pride of our family. He said I was destined for greatness, that Allah Himself had marked me for glory. The important men nodded and smiled, their gold-rimmed glasses glinting in the light, their fat fingers picking delicately at the feast. I remember standing there in my finest white thobe, the fabric stiff with newness against my skin, feeling the weight of his hand on my head. My chest should have been swelling with pride. This was everything I had worked for. This was everything I had been told to want. But instead, all I felt was tired and empty. The words I had memorized felt like stones I had swallowed. sitting heavy in my stomach. I knew every verse by heart, but not one of them had ever touched my heart. I could recite the entire Quran from memory, but I had no idea if Allah was actually listening. This was my secret shame, and I carried it alone for years. During the long prayer sessions, kneeling on expensive Persian rugs facing toward Mecca, I would recite the words perfectly while my mind drifted somewhere else entirely. I'd watch my father and uncles, their foreheads touching the ground, their lips moving in devotion, their bodies rocking with spiritual intensity, and I'd wonder, do they really feel something? Is there some connection I'm missing? Is there something broken inside me? Why does my heart feel like a locked door that no key can open? I performed every ritual with precision, hoping that the feeling would eventually come if I just kept going through the motions. 5 times a day, I washed my hands and face and feet in the exact order prescribed by tradition. 5 times a day, I knelt and prostrated, turning my face toward the holy city, mouthing the prayers I had memorized. I fasted during Ramadan until my stomach cramped and my vision blurred. I gave alms to the poor, writing checks that servants delivered to charities I never visited. I did everything I was supposed to do, but inside nothing changed. The emptiness stayed with me like a shadow I couldn't shake, like a companion I never asked for but couldn't escape. At 14, I was sent to a religious school where the strictest interpretations of Islam were taught. The campus was walled off from the outside world, a fortress of faith where questioning was forbidden and doubt was a disease to be cured. The teachers there wore long beards and longer robes. They spoke of a God who demanded obedience, who counted every mistake, who kept a ledger of sins that would be opened on Judgment Day. They told us that heaven was for those who followed every rule perfectly, and that hell awaited everyone else, a hell of fire and torture that would last for eternity. I left that school 3 years later, knowing more about religious law than most scholars. I could debate fine points of theology with experts twice my age. I could quote rulings from medieval Islamic judges on everything from inheritance law to the proper treatment of war captives. But I also left with a growing fear in my chest, a terror that I would never be good enough, that no matter how hard I tried, I would always fall short. The God they described seemed like a harsh master, counting my failures, waiting for me to slip up. I was afraid of him, but I did not love him. You cannot love something that terrifies you. Then came my marriage. In Saudi culture, marriages among wealthy families are often arranged like business deals. My father selected my wife when I was 22, after negotiations that lasted 6 months and involved lawyers on both sides. Her name was Fatima, and she came from another powerful family, one with connections to the oil ministry. Our union would strengthen both families, create new pathways to wealth and influence. I met her twice before our wedding day, both times in formal settings, with our families watching every word we exchanged. The first meeting was in her father's reception hall. Our two families arranged on opposite sides of the room like chess pieces. She wore a black abaya that covered everything but her face. And when she looked at me, her large, dark eyes seemed to be hiding something. Fear, perhaps, or resignation, or maybe just curiosity about this stranger she was being given to. On our wedding night, we were strangers sharing a bedroom. I remember sitting on the edge of our marriage bed, both of us unsure what to say. The room was decorated with flowers, roses, and jasmine that filled the air with sweetness. But beneath that sweetness was the sharp scent of two young people terrified of each other. But here is something unexpected. I grew to love her. Not the passionate love of movies and songs, the kind that burns hot and fast and leaves ashes behind. Something quieter and deeper than that. Over the years, we built a life together, brick by brick. We learned each other's habits and fears. She knew I took my coffee without sugar and that I paced when I was worried. I knew she couldn't sleep without the window cracked open, even in winter, and that she cried silently when she was hurt, tears running down her face without a sound. She understood that I retreated into silence when I was troubled, disappearing into my study for hours. I understood that her sharp tongue hid a tender heart, that her criticism came from caring. We weren't the lovers in romantic stories, but we were partners. We were companions in our gilded cage. Then Omar was born and everything changed. My son. The first time I held him, something cracked open in my chest that I didn't know existed. He was so small, this tiny bundle wrapped in white cloth, with fingers like flower petals and eyes that couldn't yet focus, but seemed to be searching for something. He looked up at me, and I made a silent promise that came from somewhere deeper than thought. I will protect you. I will give you everything I have. I will never let anything hurt you. From his first breath, I saw the same path being laid out for him that had been laid out for me. Before he could even walk, the tutors were scheduled. Before he could talk, my father was speaking of his destiny. He would memorize the Quran just as I had. He would attend religious school just as I had. He would become a guardian of tradition, a pillar of faith, a leader who would bring honor to our name. I watched my son begin his studies, saw the same hollow look growing in his eyes that I saw in my own mirror each morning, and a quiet dread took root in my heart. I was watching history repeat itself. I was watching my own emptiness being passed down like an inheritance, a curse that moved from generation to generation. The money was a distraction, but it couldn't fill the void. The power was a burden that bent my back more each year, and the palaces, with all their marble and gold, were just beautiful prisons for the soul. The change didn't start with me, it started with my son. Omar was 15 when I first noticed something different about him. He had always been a quiet boy, thoughtful and observant, the kind of child who watched more than he spoke. But that year he became withdrawn in a way that worried me. He spent hours alone in his wing of the palace, his door locked from the inside. His meals were taken in his room, picked at rather than eaten. The servants reported that he barely left his chambers except for prayers and lessons. Fatima thought it was normal teenage moodiness, the kind that all boys go through when their bodies start changing and their minds start questioning. His tutors complained that his attention seemed elsewhere during lessons, that he stared out windows instead of at his books. I assumed he was simply struggling with the weight of expectations, the same weight that had crushed something in me at his age. But I was wrong about everything. He wasn't being crushed, he was searching. In Saudi Arabia, the internet is heavily monitored by government agencies. Certain websites are blocked automatically. Certain topics will trigger alerts that bring investigators to your door. The religious police maintain lists of forbidden content, and accessing it can destroy your life. But teenage boys are clever, especially ones who have grown up with technology at their fingertips, who understand code and networks and the invisible architecture of the digital world. Omar had learned to use virtual private networks, those tools that mask your location and let you access blocked content. His bedroom became a window to the outside world, a world that was absolutely forbidden to us. Night after night, after the servants had gone to bed and the compound fell silent, He would connect to that window and look through it at things he had never been allowed to see. What he found through that window changed everything. He discovered online communities of secret believers, people across the Middle East who had converted from Islam to Christianity and now lived in hiding. There are more of them than most Westerners realize. Some estimates suggest there are millions of secret Christians throughout the Islamic world, meeting in hidden house churches, sharing their faith through encrypted messages, always watching over their shoulders for the religious police. In countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Afghanistan, leaving Islam is punishable by death. This isn't ancient history or theoretical law. People have been executed for apostasy within my lifetime. Families have turned in their own children. Brothers have killed brothers to restore family honor. The stakes could not be higher. But these secret believers took that risk anyway. They wrote about their experiences, their journeys from Islam to faith in Jesus. Omar began reading their stories late at night, his face lit by the blue glow of his phone screen. Men and women who described the same emptiness he felt, the same gnawing sense that something was missing from their lives despite having everything the world could offer. They wrote about finding peace in the words of Jesus, about a God who didn't demand perfection but offered forgiveness. They spoke of love instead of fear, of grace instead of law, of a Father in heaven who wanted relationship, not just obedience. My son started downloading the Bible, piece by piece, hiding it in folders with innocent names like school notes and video games. He devoured the Gospels in secret, reading by the faint light of his phone under his blankets like a child with a forbidden storybook. He told me later that it felt like drinking cool water after a lifetime of thirst. For the first time, the words he read actually meant something. They sank into his heart instead of sitting heavy in his stomach like the verses he had been forced to memorize. The night I discovered his secret, I had come to his room to discuss a family matter, an upcoming meeting with some business partners where I needed his presence. It was late, past 11 o'clock. The compound was quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioning units. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. Omar was sitting at his desk, his back to me, hunched over his laptop in a way that immediately told me something was wrong. On the screen, clear as day, glowing in the dim room like a beacon, was an English Bible open to the Gospel of John. The words seemed to burn themselves into my vision. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. My blood turned to ice. My legs went weak. For a moment I thought I might fall. Omar heard me gasp and spun around. His face went white, the color draining away until he looked like a ghost. For a long moment we just stared at each other, father and son, both of us frozen in terror. I could see his chest rising and falling rapidly. His hands were shaking as he reached to close the laptop, but it was too late. I had seen everything. I walked toward him slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, a drumbeat of fear that drowned out everything else. When I spoke, my voice came out as a whisper. "What is this, Omar?" He didn't lie to me. He didn't make excuses or try to explain it away. He looked me in the eyes, and I saw something there I had never seen before. Not fear exactly, though that was there too. Something else underneath it, a kind of calm certainty that seemed impossible in that moment of danger. "I found something, Father," he said, "something real." My first reaction was not understanding. It was pure animal terror. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him, harder than I meant to, my fingers digging into his thin arms. I told him he was being foolish. throwing his life away for a fantasy. I reminded him of the law, of what happened to apostates in our country, of the men and women who had been beheaded for exactly this crime. I yelled at him, I threatened him. I told him I would destroy his computer, confiscate his phone, lock him in his room until he came to his senses. I said terrible things that night, things I'm still ashamed of, words that came from the fear that had me by the throat. Fear makes us cruel in ways we don't expect. But through all my shouting, Omar just sat there. He didn't argue back. He didn't fight or defend himself. He didn't cry, though I could see his eyes were wet. He just looked at me with those calm eyes, and when I finally stopped to catch my breath, he said something that stopped me cold. "Father," he said quietly, "I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time in my entire life, I'm not afraid." I sank down onto the edge of his bed. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. I stared at my son, this boy I had known since he was a tiny bundle in my arms, and I realized I was looking at a stranger, but not a stranger I feared, a stranger I envied. The emptiness in his eyes was gone. The hollowness I had watched grow in him year after year, the same hollowness that lived in my own chest, like a cold stone, had simply disappeared. In its place was something I couldn't name, a light, a peace, a fullness that seemed impossible in this house of shadows. "Tell me," I said finally, my voice breaking. "Tell me what you've found." And he did. He talked for hours that night, his voice soft so it wouldn't carry through the walls. He told me about a God who wasn't a distant judge keeping score of our failures, but a loving Father who wanted to know us personally. He talked about Jesus, not as a prophet as we had been taught, but as the Son of God who came to earth to rescue us from ourselves. He explained grace, this strange idea that we don't have to earn our way to God, that forgiveness is offered freely to anyone who asks for it. He described a peace that passes understanding, a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. He told me about believers who had lost everything, their families, their homes, their countries, and still claimed to have found something worth more than all of it combined. I listened, and somewhere in those hours, as the night grew deep and the first hints of dawn touched the sky, the walls around my own heart began to crack. Over the following weeks, I watched my son transform before my eyes. The change was undeniable, visible to anyone who looked. He was kinder to the servants, treating them with a respect that was unusual in our household. He remembered their names. He asked about their families. He thanked them for things no one had ever thanked them for before. He was more patient with his younger cousins, who had always annoyed him with their noise and demands. He smiled more, and it wasn't the polite smile of social obligation. It came from somewhere deeper. He laughed more freely. The heaviness that had pressed down on him for years seemed to lift, replaced by something lighter. One evening, I caught him helping one of the kitchen workers carry heavy bags of rice to the storage room. In our family, princes didn't do such things. Servants served, princes watched. When I asked him about it later, he just shrugged. Jesus washed the feet of his followers, he said. If God himself could serve others, who am I to think I'm above it? My curiosity grew into something desperate. What was this faith that could change a person so completely? I found myself thinking about it during business meetings, during the long prayers where my lips moved automatically while my mind wandered. The questions wouldn't leave me alone, so I began to read in secret. Omar gave me access to the same materials he had found. Late at night, locked in my private study with the door bolted and the curtains drawn, I started reading the Bible for the first time in my life. I began with the Gospels, these accounts of Jesus' life written by his followers. I read about his teachings, so different from what I had been taught. I read about his miracles, healings that couldn't be explained. I read about his kindness to the outcasts and sinners that religious people rejected, the tax collectors, the adulterers, the poor and sick and lost. I read about his death on a cross, taking the punishment for sins he didn't commit, dying in agony so that others might live. And I read about his resurrection 3 days later, his victory over death itself, the promise that everyone who believed in him would share that victory. The words began to tear down walls I had built over 50 years, walls of ritual and rule that I thought were keeping me safe, but were really keeping me trapped. Every night I would read another chapter, and every night something inside me shifted. The emptiness I had carried my entire life began to make sense. I had been trying to earn God's love through perfect obedience, through endless rituals, through checking every box on a cosmic list of requirements. But these words told me that God's love couldn't be earned. It could only be received. One night, alone in my study with only the lamp for company, I knelt on the floor and did something I had never done before. I prayed. Not the formal recitations I had memorized as a child, but a desperate, honest prayer from the depths of my heart. If you're real, I whispered into the darkness, show me. I've been empty for so long. I can't carry this weight anymore. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of feeling nothing. Please. And in that silence, something answered. Not an audible voice, but a presence. A warmth that spread through my chest, filling spaces that had been hollow for decades. The fear that had gripped me my entire life loosened its hold just a little, and for the first time since I was a child, I wept. For 10 months, we lived 2 lives. During the day, we were the perfect Saudi prince and his son. We attended Friday prayers at the Grand Mosque, kneeling in the front rows with the other men of status. We hosted religious scholars in our home, serving them coffee and dates while they discussed fine points of Islamic law. We performed every ritual with precision, the prayers, the fasts, the charitable giving. When family members visited, we discussed theology with the proper vocabulary and the proper expressions of devotion. No one suspected anything, but at night, everything changed. Omar and I would meet in my study after midnight, when the compound was quiet and even the guards were drowsy at their posts. We would lock the door, draw the heavy curtains, and read the Bible together by the soft light of a single lamp turned low. We whispered prayers in the name of Jesus, our voices barely audible above the hum of the air. Conditioning. We shared what we were learning, asking each other questions, wrestling with ideas that challenged everything we had been taught since birth. Those nights were the most alive I had ever felt. In that small circle of lamplight, with my son beside me and words of hope open before us, I experienced something I had sought my entire life without knowing it. Connection. Real, true connection to my son, to myself, to a God who seemed close instead of distant. I told Fatima about my newfound faith after 3 months. I had to. We had shared everything for 25 years, and this secret was too big to carry alone. It was changing me in ways she couldn't help but notice. The way I spoke to the servants, the expression on my face during our evening meals, the hours I spent in my study reading things I wouldn't explain. Her reaction surprised me. She didn't scream or threaten to expose us. She listened, her dark eyes never leaving my face, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished talking, she was quiet, for a long time, so long that I began to worry she was thinking about who to report us to. "I've watched you change," she finally said. "Both of you. Something is different. You seem lighter." She paused. "I don't understand this Jesus of yours, but I can see what believing in him has done to you and our son." She never converted. She couldn't take that step. The risk was too great, the change too drastic, but she kept our secret. She covered for us when we needed privacy. She warned us when family members were getting suspicious. In her own way, she protected us, even though she didn't share our faith. That was her gift to us, and I have never stopped being grateful for it. The months passed, and our secret community grew. Through encrypted messages and coded language, Omar connected with other believers across the kingdom. There were more of us than I had imagined. Doctors who treated patients by day and prayed to Jesus by night. Teachers who taught Islamic studies in schools while secretly reading the Bible at home. Businessmen, government workers, even a few distant members of the royal family. All of us hiding, all of us afraid, all of us clinging to a faith that could cost us everything. We called ourselves the people of the book. We never met in person, the risk was too great. But through the invisible channels of the internet, we supported each other. We shared prayers and encouragements. We warned each other when someone was suspected. We mourned together when one of us was caught. But secrets in a palace don't stay secret forever. Too many eyes, too many servants, too much at stake. The man who betrayed us was named Hassan. He had worked for our family for 28 years. He had served my father before serving me. He had been at my wedding, standing quietly in the corner with the other servants. He had been at Omar's birth, bringing tea to the waiting room where I paced. He had been present at every celebration, every tragedy, every moment of significance in our family's life. I trusted him completely. Hassan cleaned my study every morning at dawn. One night, running late on his rounds, he came to collect the teacups and found Omar and me reading the Bible. We didn't hear him enter. We were too absorbed in what we were reading. He stood in the doorway for just a moment, long enough to see the forbidden book open on my desk, long enough to see my son and me bowed over it like men at prayer. Then he slipped away without a sound. For 3 days, nothing happened. I noticed Hassan avoiding my eyes, but I told myself it was my imagination. I thought perhaps he hadn't understood what he'd seen, or that he would keep quiet out of loyalty to our family. I was wrong. Hassan went to my brother Khalid. I understand now why he did it. In his mind, he was doing his religious duty. The Quran commands believers to stand against apostasy, to report it and fight it. By telling my brother what he had seen, Hassan believed he was serving God. He was torn between his loyalty to our family and what he saw as a higher loyalty, a sacred obligation. In the end, faith won over friendship. I cannot hate him for it, even now. He did what he believed was right. The morning they came for us started like any other morning. I woke at dawn for the first prayer of the day. I performed my ablutions in the marble bathroom, washing my hands 3 times, my face 3 times, running wet fingers over my head. I walked to the prayer room, knelt facing Mecca, recited the familiar words. I had done this thousands of times. It felt like any other morning. But when I finished and walked to the dining room for breakfast, my brother Khalid was sitting at my table. He was drinking my coffee from one of my cups. Beside him stood 2 of our family's security guards, men I had known for years, their faces now as blank as stone. Khalid's face was like a mask carved from ice. He was 3 years younger than me, but he had always been harder, more rigid in his beliefs. He was the enforcer in our family, the one who handled problems that required ruthlessness. When he spoke, his voice was flat. Father wants to see you and the boy now. My heart started pounding, but I kept my face calm. Of course, let me get Omar. The guards will get him, Khalid said. You come with me. The walk to my father's palace felt like walking to my execution. Every step echoed in the marble corridors. Every servant we passed looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. They knew, somehow they all knew. The news had spread through the compound like fire through dry grass. The prince and his son were apostates. The prince and his son had betrayed everything. The family council was held in my father's grand hall, a room I had known my entire life. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Persian carpets worth hundreds of thousands covered the floor. Gold-framed mirrors lined the walls, reflecting an infinity of angry faces. My father sat at the head of a long marble table, the same table where he had ruled our family for 60 years. He was 82 years old, his beard now white instead of black. His shoulders stooped with age, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of the authority that had commanded respect for 6 decades. To his right sat my uncles, 5 of them, their faces hard as the stone around us. To his left sat my brothers, 3 of them, including Khalid, who had brought me here. These were the men who controlled our family's fortune, our reputation, our very existence. Guards brought Omar in from a side door. My son's face was pale, and I could see he had been crying, though his cheeks were dry now. But his eyes found mine across the room, and in them I saw that strange calm that had first shocked me all those months ago. He wasn't afraid, or if he was, he had surrendered that fear to something larger than himself. They sat us down at the far end of the table, facing the council of our own family. Between us and them, placed precisely in the center of the marble surface, lay 2 books, the Quran, its cover green and gold, and a Bible. The Bible was the same one Omar had been reading. Someone had found it in his room. My father spoke first. His voice was quiet, which was worse than if he had shouted, "Is it true?" I looked at my son. He looked back at me. In that glance, we made a decision without speaking a single word. We had talked about this moment. We had prayed about it. We knew it might come. "Yes," I said, "it's true." The room exploded. My brothers shouted accusations. My uncles pounded the table. One of them swept his arm across the surface, sending the Bible crashing to the floor. Voices overlapped, faces twisted with rage, fingers pointed at us like weapons. Through all of it, my father sat silent, watching me with those sharp old eyes that had always seen too much. When the noise finally died down, he raised one hand, instant silence. Even now, at 82, he commanded that kind of respect. "You have shamed us," he said. "You have betrayed your family, your faith, your country. You have poisoned your own son with this filth." He gestured at the Bible lying on the floor. "Do you understand what you have done? Do you understand what this means for all of us?" I understood better than he knew. I understood that I was sitting in a room with men who would kill their own blood to preserve their honor. I understood that in their eyes, apostasy wasn't just a religious crime. It was a stain that had to be washed away with blood. This wasn't about theology or truth or faith. It was about power, about control, about a system that had kept our family in its position for generations. My father continued, "But you are my son, my firstborn, and despite everything, I am giving you a chance." He pointed at the Quran. "You will place your hand on the holy book. You will recite the Shahada. You will declare that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." You will repent of this madness publicly and completely, and you will force your son to do the same." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle over the room like a shroud. "If you refuse, if you choose this blasphemy over your own blood, then you are no longer my son. You will be stripped of your name, your title, your inheritance. Every account, every property, every connection will be taken from you. You will walk out of this room with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will be erased from our family as if you had never existed." Then his eyes moved to Omar, and something in his gaze turned to ice, something ancient and terrible. "And the boy who started this corruption, his punishment will be according to Sharia. Apostasy has only one sentence: death." He meant death. My father was telling me that if I didn't comply, he would have my 17-year-old son killed according to Islamic law. And he would do it without hesitation, without remorse, believing with all his heart that he was doing the right thing. My hands started trembling, my vision blurred. I heard a roaring in my ears like ocean waves crashing against rocks. This wasn't a bluff. I had seen what happened to apostates in our country. I had heard stories of families who turned their own children over to religious authorities. I knew my father was capable of this. He believed with all his heart that killing an apostate was an act of righteousness, a mercy to the sinner's soul and a duty to God. I looked at my son. Tears were streaming down his face now, but he wasn't sobbing. The tears fell silently as he looked at me with eyes that had seen something beyond this room, beyond this moment, beyond the power these men held over our bodies. He shook his head slowly. "Don't do it, father," he whispered. "Not for me, don't deny him for me." My father slammed his palm on the table. "Silence," he turned to me. "Choose your family and your faith, or this foreign god and exile. Choose now." The room went quiet. Everyone was watching. The chandeliers cast their cold light on the scene. The mirrors reflected it endlessly. A father being asked to betray either his family or his son, over and over, in every direction. I thought of everything I would lose. The money, billions in accounts I would never touch again. The status, centuries of family reputation, gone in an instant. The only world I had ever known, wiped away like a dream upon waking. I thought of Fatima, left behind to face the shame alone. I thought of the businesses, the properties, the influence that would vanish. I thought of friends who would become strangers, of doors that would close forever. Then I thought of the emptiness I had carried for 50 years. I thought of the peace that had finally filled that void. I thought of my son sitting across from me, willing to die rather than deny what he believed. I thought of Jesus, who had given up everything, not a kingdom of oil and gold, but a kingdom of heaven, to come and rescue people like me. I stood up. The room held its breath. I walked around the table, past my frozen brothers, past my silent uncles, past my father whose eyes followed me with burning fury. I walked to where my son sat, and I placed my hand on his shoulder. I could feel him trembling beneath my palm. Then I turned to face them all. "My son's life is in God's hands," I said. My voice was shaking, but each word came out clear. "And so is mine. We choose Jesus." The moment those words left my mouth, everything changed. My father's face twisted into something I had never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of grief mixed with disgust. It was as if he was looking at a corpse, something already dead and beginning to rot. He nodded sharply to the guards, and they moved forward. Omar was pulled from his chair and taken out through a side door. I shouted his name, tried to reach him, but strong hands grabbed my arms and held me back. The last thing I saw was my son looking back at me over his shoulder, his eyes still calm, still trusting, as he disappeared from view. They took me to a different part of the compound, to a suite of rooms that became my prison. The doors were locked from the outside. The windows faced an inner courtyard with no way out. My phone was taken. My computer was removed. Every connection to the outside world was cut like veins being severed. For 3 days, I heard nothing about Omar. I didn't know if he was alive or dead. I didn't know what they were doing to him, what questions they were asking, what methods they were using. I paced those rooms until I wore patterns in the carpet. I prayed until my knees ached and my voice went hoarse. I begged God for a miracle. On the 3rd day, they brought me the document. It was a simple piece of paper typed in formal Arabic, a declaration of repentance, confessing my sins against Islam and swearing my return to the true faith. My signature would mean freedom. My signature would save Omar's life. That's what my brother Khalid told me as he placed the document on the desk. I sat at the desk, the pen in my hand. The paper was white and clean, waiting. My father stood behind me, watching. "Sign it," he said. "This madness ends now. Your son will be returned to you. Everything goes back to the way it was. All you have to do is sign." My hand hovered over the paper. The pen touched down, leaving a small black dot on the white surface. And then I put the pen down. "I can't," I said. "I won't." My father made a sound I had never heard before, something between a growl and a sob, and left the room. The door slammed behind him. I was alone again. That night, desperation became clarity. I knew we had only a small window of time before they decided what to do with Omar. The family would meet again, debate again, pray for guidance again. Eventually, someone would make a decision. I couldn't wait. For that decision, there was one person who might help me. A foreign businessman I had assisted years earlier, a man named Thomas. He was a Christian, though he kept that quiet in Saudi Arabia. He had connections to underground networks that helped believers escape from persecution, modern versions of the Underground Railroad that once helped slaves escape to freedom. I had introduced him to the right people, helped him navigate business deals, protected him from some dangerous situations. He owed me, but how could I reach him? My phone was gone. My guards were loyal to my father. Every servant in the compound would report any suspicious behavior. Then I remembered Ahmed. Not my own name, the one I was born with, but a kitchen worker who happened to share it. I had helped him once, years ago, when his daughter was sick with a disease that required treatment abroad. He couldn't afford it. I had paid for everything without telling anyone, without expecting anything in return. It was a small kindness, forgotten almost as soon as it was done. Ahmed brought my meals. The next time he came, setting down the tray with its covered dishes, I looked him in the eyes and whispered a request. Just a few words, just a name and a message. His face went pale. He understood what I was asking and what it would cost him if he was caught. He could lose his job, his freedom, possibly his life. But he nodded once, took the tray and left. 2 days later, my food tray came with a folded note hidden beneath the flatbread. Thomas had received my message. He was arranging everything. The plan was terrifyingly simple. During a guard shift change in the 20-minute window, when security was thin, Omar would be smuggled out through a service entrance by one of Thomas's people. A car would take him to a small apartment in a crowded district of Riyadh, a place where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. I would follow that night, slipping out through a side gate that Ahmed would leave unlocked. Everything depended on timing. Everything depended on luck. Everything depended on God. The night of the escape, I couldn't stop shaking. I sat in my room dressed in simple clothes, a plain thobe, sandals, nothing that would draw attention. A small bag sat at my feet, containing nothing but a change of clothes and my Bible. At 2 a.m, I heard a soft knock at my door. Ahmed's voice, barely a whisper. "It's time." I walked out of that room, out of that wing, out of the compound I had called home for 53 years. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to look back, couldn't afford even a moment of hesitation. The side gate was open, just as promised. I slipped through and stepped into the darkness of the city. The streets of Riyadh at 2 a.m. are empty and strange, a different world from the bustling daylight hours. Street lamps cast pools of orange light. Stray cats moved through the shadows. I walked quickly, keeping to the darkness, expecting at any moment to hear shouts behind me, to feel a hand on my shoulder. My heart pounded so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. The apartment was in a rundown building, in a poor neighborhood, the kind of place where wealthy Saudis never went. I climbed 5 flights of concrete stairs, each step feeling like a mountain, and knocked on a battered door with a specific pattern Thomas had told me. 3 knocks, a pause. 2 knocks, a pause, 1 knock. The door opened, and there was Omar. We held each other without speaking. My arms wrapped around my son, feeling how thin he had become, how his ribs pressed against my chest. He was thinner than he had been, with shadows under his eyes and marks on his wrists I didn't ask about. But he was alive. He was free. We stood there in that dirty little apartment, tears streaming down our faces, and for a long moment nothing else mattered. We hid there for 6 days, 6 days of jumping at every sound, of keeping the lights off during the day, of speaking only in whispers. Thomas's people brought us food and water in the middle of the night. They brought us new clothes and forged documents. They told us about the next stage of the plan. We would leave the city hidden in the back of a cargo truck, buried among crates of vegetables, heading for a port city on the coast. From there, a boat would take us across the water to a neighboring country where we could catch a flight to Europe. The journey was terrible. The truck was hot and airless, with no ventilation, no light. We lay between wooden crates, barely able to move, breathing through cloth masks to filter the smell of rotting produce. The drive lasted 18 hours. Omar got sick halfway through, and I held him while he vomited into a plastic bag, terrified that the driver would hear and stop to investigate, terrified that his weakness would give us away. But we made it. The boat was a fishing vessel, old and rusting, smelling of salt and diesel and fish guts. The captain was a gruff man who asked no questions and took our money without looking us in the eye. We crossed the water at night, the stars above us brighter than I had ever seen them, more stars than I knew existed. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The flight to Europe was the final step. We landed in a small country I won't name, carrying nothing but our forged papers and the clothes on our backs. When we walked out of that airport into the cold European morning, the air hitting our faces like a slap of freedom, I finally let myself believe it. We were free. That was 5 years ago. Sometimes I still dream about the palace. In those dreams, I'm walking through the corridors I knew so well, my bare feet on the cool marble, the chandeliers tinkling faintly above me. I pass the room where I was born, the room where Omar took his first steps, the room where my father told me stories as a child. Everything is exactly as I remember it, frozen in time like a photograph. But when I reach out to touch the walls, my hand passes through them like smoke. I am a ghost in my own past, present but unable to connect, watching a life that no longer belongs to me. I wake from these dreams with tears on my face, though I cannot always say whether they are tears of grief or tears of relief. Both, perhaps. Grief for what was lost and relief for what was gained. The hardest part of our new life in those first months was learning to be ordinary. I had never cooked a meal in my life. I had never washed my own clothes. I had never stood in a queue or waited for a bus or worried about whether there was enough money to pay the rent. These simple acts that most people master in childhood were mysteries to me at 53. Omar taught me how to use a washing machine. He had to show me 3 times before I understood which buttons to press, which drawer was for soap, how to separate colors from whites. The first time I tried to cook rice, I burned it so badly that the smoke alarm went off and our neighbors came knocking to make sure we weren't in danger. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by smoke, holding a ruined pot, and I started to laugh. I laughed until I cried, until Omar came running in looking worried, until I had to sit down on the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. "Father," Omar said, kneeling beside me, "are you all right?" "I burned rice," I said through my laughter. I had servants who served my servants, and I couldn't cook a pot of rice. He smiled then, the same smile I remembered from when he was a little boy, before the weight of expectations pressed it out of him. "It's okay," he said, "we'll learn together." And we did. We learned to cook and clean and budget and survive. We learned the rhythms of ordinary life, the small victories of a successful dinner, the quiet satisfaction of a tidy home. We learned that freedom tastes better than any feast in any palace, even when that freedom comes with burned rice and a smoke alarm screaming at 2 in the morning. Today, Omar and I live in a small rented apartment in a quiet European town. The buildings here are old stone, not gleaming marble. Our furniture came from second-hand shops and charity stores. Our kitchen is tiny, smaller than the bathroom I used to have in Riyadh. Our heating doesn't always work in winter, and we've learned to wear extra jumpers and drink a lot of tea. We have no servants, no guards, no chandeliers. I work a simple job now, nothing I can tell you about for safety reasons. It pays the bills, barely. Omar is studying at a local college, making friends, building a life. He wants to help other people like us one day, other believers in hiding who need someone to reach out a hand, someone who understands what it means to lose everything for what you believe. Fatima didn't come with us. I asked her to, begged her, but she couldn't leave everything behind. Her mother, her sisters, the only world she had ever known. We speak sometimes through encrypted channels, brief conversations filled with things we can't say out loud. She tells me she's okay. She tells me the family has mostly stopped looking for us. I pray for her every single day. I think about what I lost. There are moments when the weight of it hits me like a wave, usually late at night when sleep won't come. I lost a fortune that could have lasted generations. I lost the only country I ever knew. I lost my family, my name, my entire identity. Sometimes I wake from dreams where I'm walking through the marble halls of my father's palace, running my fingers along the walls, and for a few confused seconds, I don't know where I am. But then I hear Omar moving in the next room, making coffee in our little kitchen, humming some song he learned at school. And I remember what I gained. I gained my son. I gained his life, his freedom, his future. I gained a faith that has filled every empty space inside me, spaces I didn't even know existed until they were filled. I gained a relationship with a God who doesn't demand that I earn His love, who offers forgiveness freely, who calls me his child. I started this story as a prince, born into a palace, raised to rule, surrounded by gold, and drowning in emptiness. I started as a Muslim who followed every rule but felt nothing, who prayed every prayer but never connected, who had everything the world could offer and found it worthless. I end this story as a refugee, living in a small apartment, working a humble job, finally free. I end as a Christian who has found something worth more than all the gold in Arabia. I end as a father whose son is alive and safe and free to worship the God he loves without fear. People ask me sometimes if I have regrets. They ask if there are moments when I wish I had signed that paper, when I wish I had saved myself and returned to the life I knew. I understand why they ask. From the outside, my choice looks like madness. I traded palaces for a rented flat. I traded billions for a modest wage. I traded power for anonymity. But they don't understand what I was really trading. I wasn't trading wealth for poverty. I was trading emptiness for fullness. I wasn't trading comfort for hardship. I was trading a beautiful prison for a humble freedom. I wasn't trading security for danger. I was trading the illusion of control for the reality of trust. And most of all, I was trading my son's death for his life. When I look at Omar now, studying for his exams, making plans for his future, laughing with friends he's made in this new country, I know that every sacrifice was worth it. When I see him bow his head in prayer, speaking freely to the God he loves without fear of discovery, without whispering in the darkness, I know that I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. There is a verse in the Bible that has become my anchor. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? I had gained the whole world, or at least a very large piece of it, and my soul was withering inside me. I had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't buy. I had power but no peace. I had wealth but no worth. I had status but no substance. Now I have none of those things the world values, but I have everything that truly matters. I have my son, I have my faith. I have the knowledge that when my head touches the pillow each night, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. What's a kingdom worth compared to your son's soul? What's a mountain of gold compared to a single moment of real peace? I lost everything the world tells you to want, only to find everything you could ever truly need. If my story has touched your heart, please like this video and share it. Somewhere out there is someone still trapped in their own gilded cage, someone still carrying that terrible emptiness, someone still wondering if there's more to life than going through the motions. This story might be the window they need to see a different world. Subscribe for more stories of faith and let me know in the comments, what would you be willing to risk for what you believe in? Thank you for listening. And wherever you are, whatever cage you might be trapped in, know this: there is a God who sees you, who loves you, and who is reaching out his hand. All you have to do is take it.